This is the Indigenous Environmental Network. For more information, go to ienearth.org.
And then we took that to the inaugural UN Ocean Summit in, I want to say, 2016. And and we were successful in laying that petition before the Norwegian government, and then our brothers and sisters in so-called San Francisco marched with that petition upon Chevron refineries, the Richmond refinery as well. And 3 years later, so they left, they took off. It was a funny story, actually. When we went on the waka, we went with a lot of prayers. We were like one waka ocean voyaging canoe, the as Amazon Warrior, which is the seismic survey vessel, which I want to say is disgusting that they name it after our Amazon relations, which is a sacred name. So they use that, as they always do. Used sacred Indigenous names for the survey vessel that was blasting our ocean with the equivalent of like a micronuclear bomb every 10 seconds, 24 hours a day for 3 months at a time during the migratory period of our. It's not good at any time. It majorly disrupts our ecosystems. But they also wanted to do it during the time of our migratory routes being in action as well. So we were just out there throwing everything we had. We opposed every single infrastructural request that they put into our local council. We brand shamed them. We used our waka to intercept them and cost them a heap of money. And we prayed. And when we prayed, I want to say, I'm still proud of this almost the most, our shark relations showed up and attacked the survey streams that they used to blast and get the data back up. And it delayed them enough because they had to send to Thailand for new streams, delayed them enough that we could call our other waka to come and help us and back us up. And then we prayed some more while we kept on intercepting them because we couldn't keep doing it. And our government had passed under urgency a law to criminalize ocean protests. And so then the cyclone showed up. And so waka can actually travel quite well in cyclones, but survey vessels can't. So they had to drop what they were doing. They never completed one grid. That was a complete economic failure for them, and they went back to where they came from, but they still had the permit, but they never came back, and 3 years later they abandoned the permit. And then that summer we got the government to agree to put a permanent ban on offshore drilling so that it was done. Now the government has come in and is reversing the ban. So it's opening the entire coastline back up again to offshore drilling. I want to point out also, though, that that's just within our EEZ. For us, one of the big challenges is that dealing with this in this transnational space, there's also a whole lot of coloniality that happens in between our island homes as well, that somehow the United Nations deemed it appropriate to say that this will belong to the whole planet and essentially carve our moana up with all of these constructed borders. And this is the Convention on the Law of the Seas, UNCLOS. Carve it up, create high seas territories that apparently give equal rights to landlocked nations in Africa, Europe, everywhere who have nothing to do with our ocean, and accord them equal and sometimes greater rights of determination over our moana than us who live with, on, by, give birth in and on these waters, worship these waters, feed from these waters, look after these waters since time immemorial. That once that high sea area was defined by the Convention of the Law of the Sea. and it was put under the International Seabed Authority, under the UN and Bretton Woods system. The vast majority of the nations who have the voting rights in the International Seabed Authority, where they're giving out licenses consistently for drilling seabed nodules for the purposes of making e-batteries and solar batteries and solar panels, that a lot of that seabed mining that's happening now is similar to what we're talking about, a false solution, because it's ruining those very sacred deep spaces that I was talking about at the base of our ocean are now being raked and desecrated, because they are sacred spaces, desecrated for these seabed minerals and nodules in order to be able to cope with the rising market of e-batteries and e-vehicles. So, and of course, even though the UN carves our Moana territory up, you know, our whales don't go, oh, there's a border. Don't have my passport, better turn around. They get, all of our creatures move, our eels, our tuna move from up at the top of our streams in Aotearoa out to the coastline, along the coastline and out to the Tonga Trench and then back again. So these ecosystems, it's like these completely artificial, contrived ideas about regions and rights and entitlements that are imposed upon our Pacific region. And of course, over and above all of that, all of the climate criminality, and this is largely driven by the global north and the west, who also create the bulk of the emissions that many of us suffer from. I'm also from the East Cape, which is the most heavily climate impacted area of Aotearoa. We're just smashed by cyclones every year, and it's getting worse and worse every year. So that's just a little bit of insight into what's happening in our part of the area. I'll pass it across to you now, Moñeka.
Thank you, sister. So we're using this mic, I guess, to record all the stories that are being shared, and I'm excited to hear all the wisdom that's in all the other circles happening around here. And so, just to bring us back, Aotearoa, New Zealand is the very south of Moana Nuakea, or the Great Pacific Ocean, which is, I don't think people fathom how big the Pacific Ocean is, how much of the world, I think it's 60% of the world's oceans is in the Pacific, and it's comprised of 29 independent nations, and then there's still quite a few, Guahan being one, the CNMI being another, Kanaki islands that are still colonized. Both me and Anna, my mom, and Michelle are all from the Marianas, which are U.S. territories and or the sort of outpost of the colonial empire of the so-called United States. And what that means is that our lands and oceans are very much used for quote-unquote national security. And so Guahan, which is Guam, the southernmost island of 15 islands that make up the Marianas, or Lagua Sangani, the indigenous name, is and has been a U.S. territory since 1898. It's still one of the last remaining places on the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories. And so our people have yet to exercise our human right to self-determination. And before that, Guam and the Marianas were colonized by the Spanish Empire for almost 300 years. We were actually the first place in all of the Pacific to be discovered by Westerners when Magellan, after 99 days adrift from the coast of Mexico, was basically saved by our people. His ships, after trying to circumnavigate and go around South America, were afloat for 99 days, and our people saved them and fed them and gave them water, much needed sustenance. If you can imagine being out at sea for 3 months and there was massive scurvy and lots of irrational behavior, which led them to, after all of that, killing 7 of our people, burning down, or 33 of our people, burning down 7 of our huts. And this is, in 1521, so just about 500 years ago. And that one historical occurrence, it led to centuries of colonization, first in the Marianas, and then throughout the rest of the Pacific as more Western countries and empires came through. And almost all of the nations and peoples of the Pacific have been colonized in one way or another. I think the only one that has always exercised and maintained its sovereignty is the Kingdom of Tonga. I may be wrong. And like most other colonies, our Pacific islands and our ocean have been exploited for for mineral wealth, for resource extraction. And we see this very heavily in places like Papua New Guinea, in Australia, and all across our islands. One of the most famous that I'm aware of is in Nauru, which basically mined out the entire island to where, and this is in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where they mined out 80% of the island for phosphate. And that's used a lot in agriculture for fertilizer. And now there's no water in Nauru, and you have to import all water for both potable water for flushing and for drinking. And if there's anything that islanders know innately, because our resources are so finite, is how to manage and maintain and share what little we have. And I come from the island of Guam, which in the native Chamorro language is Guahan, which means we have. It's a place of abundance. It's a place that has been able to sustain the Chamorro ancestors for 4,000 years. And thousands of years before that fateful meeting with Magellan 500 years ago, a little over 500 years ago. And something that it's something that we're reclaiming now, that idea of Guahan, because after those centuries of colonization, and we've basically been brainwashed into thinking you're so small, you're so isolated, you can't take care of yourself. And so much of the work that I've done, and since my first son was born in the last 15 years, is just reclaiming the native word for our lands and reminding people that we are a place of having, we are a place of abundance, we can take care of ourselves. And just that reminder has been such a healing and motivating experience to really protect what left is sacred. I'm going to share, and I excuse me if I'm kind of rambling. I do have kind of a brain fog from the traveling here and also from being a mom to a almost graduated newborn. He's an infant. But I wanted to share some words directly from a group of people in not only Guahan, but words that were created in this declaration that brought together people, many that are here, from all over Turtle Island, and most especially from the Philippines, from Japan, Okinawa, Hawaii, and all over Micronesia, in this gathering called Making Waves. And we created the People's Declaration for Peace, Unity, and Climate Justice in the Pacific last year. And we're also collecting signatures here. But I wanted to share it with you because it is so beautiful. And it really speaks to climate change and the need to promote peace against the hypermilitarization that we're experiencing. And while that's happening, I also want to share some medicine that I gathered on the full moon and dried out right before that from our islands, and the poster that sort of speaks to this declaration. And so when the medicine comes to you, you just want to break it up a little bit and smell it. It's made up of herbs and flowers that were used in arrangements for a art show that we just opened around native sovereignty and land rights in Guahan and in the Marianas. And also a flower weaving workshop that I led on the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Guam. But here's the declaration. We peoples of the land and peoples of the ocean of the Pacifica Oceania region, gathered in the Mariana Islands, ancestral lands of the Chamorro people, islands closest to the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the earth. On October 20th, 2023, at the Making Waves Peace and Climate Justice Summit, we came together on the island of Guahan in solidarity with peoples throughout Micronesia and the Pacific Rim, and with Indigenous allies and climate justice leaders from First Nation, Black, Caribbean, and other marginalized territories and communities from across the globe committed to dismantling oppression. We join in an urgent call for peace, unity, and climate justice in our islands and throughout the Pacific. We stand in solidarity with Palestine, Congo, Sudan, West Papua, Kanaki, and all peoples experiencing genocide and oppression under colonialism. Many voyaged across the waters to share our vision and struggles for a more peaceful, just, healthy, and sustainable future. Our waters bring us together and unite us. They create a bridge that connects our stories across communities. As Pacific peoples, we exercise the rights and fulfill the responsibilities given to us by Creator for the lands and waters upon which we were placed. We have the right to govern ourselves and set a path of our collective future. We are rooted in our lands, waters, languages, and the wisdom and cultural practices and values of our ancestors. We call forth a future guided by abundance, generosity, love, hope, and self-determination. Free from militarization, free from colonialism, and free from climate injustice. Our communities have been harmed by centuries of military and colonial occupation that divides us, erodes our cultural practices and self-sufficiency, and leaves us more vulnerable to climate catastrophes. Global inaction on climate change and political tensions in our region threaten to exacerbate these conditions. Climate change has increased the strength and frequencies of typhoons, floodings, earthquakes, wildfires, warming oceans, and the loss of vital resources, including fish, corals, and native plants and species which threaten our health and survival. Our people also face worsening economic conditions with few opportunities for our youth, families, and elders to thrive in our lands. Our Indigenous peoples have been displaced and dispossessed, their lands and waters contaminated, taken, enclosed, and occupied by military and other forces. Our voices have been systematically divided, marginalized, and silenced in regional, national, and international decision-making forums that exclude us due to continued colonization and having the status of non-self-governing territories. For example, Guahan and the Northern Marianas do not represent themselves in international governing bodies such as the International Negotiating Committee. This directly impacts our way of life and well-being. Our bodies, lands, and waters are poisoned by toxins from military operations and the dumping of plastics and nuclear waste in our oceans and lands. The Pacific Islands are responsible for less than 0.03% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but experience some of the worst climate disasters in the world and have yet to receive restorative justice in the form of payments from the international community for loss and damages. We refuse to be silenced or continue to be sacrifice zones for the rest of the world. There is an opening now to repair, regenerate, and restore our relationship to our biodiversity and culture, but we must act. Our vision for the future centers on community-owned, climate-resilient infrastructures that honor Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, protocols, cultural practices, language, multi-generational learning that continues the long-standing connection with and protection of sacred lands and waters that are critical to sustainable maintenance. We have abundance all around us, and traditional ecological knowledge is integral to our identities to practice resilience and to thrive with investments in community-designed housing, transportation, healthcare, education, food, energy, water, and land rematriation. Our communities have sustainable and healthy practices for growing our own food and medicines and for stewarding our lands and waters in balance with nature. We need the investments to manifest our futures. We call upon our decision makers, neighbors, world leaders, national and international governing bodies, and their militaries to honor treaties that protect our lands and waters, protect us from worsening climate change, protect the health and well-being of our people, and respect our sovereignty and self-determination. The military should begin a process of remediating and returning ancestral lands and waters to repair harm. This includes adherence to the principles of free, prior, and informed consent for any decisions and actions that impact our communities. We call upon governments and the military to clean up toxins in our drinking water, in our aquifers, our lands, and oceans, and to regulate and stop industries that pollute and destroy and divest from false solutions, like fossil fuels, nuclear energy, and testing or experiments that harm all living things. We call on stronger accountability measures to hold international governments responsible for past, present, and future environmental degradation, and for those most impacted by pollution and climate change to be centered in the decision-making process. We demand access to clean, pollution-free, affordable, renewable energy that is community-owned and governed, such as solar and wind power. We reject the false solution that entrench our dependence on fossil fuels and the military. Energy and food sovereignty must be coupled with community-led just recovery practices that restore and strengthen our communities after climate disasters. This means access to more funding and direct investments to communities to rebuild our own systems that are decentralized and provide a means for economic independence and sustainability for future generations to prosper. We call for fair access and just climate financing to ensure our communities can mitigate, prepare for, adapt to, and recover from climate-induced disasters and rebuild in a regenerative manner. These resources should be strengthened local networks that have been proven to provide fast, on-the-ground aid and help us move away from the reliance on international disaster recovery aid. We call for resources to develop our own Indigenous educational systems that prioritize our own ancestral knowledge, worldviews, and priorities that center ecological traditional knowledge, as well as place-based, hands-on, multi-generational learning. Our communities will be stronger when we build our power through organizing and advocating that directly engages our people. We can leverage the power of shared storytelling, digital media, and arts and culture to bridge our visions and struggles for climate justice, decolonization, and peace. The Mariana Islands and sister nations and territories across the Pacific demand a seat at the table and a right to have our voices heard and heeded in all decision-making that impacts our homelands. This includes access to international governing authorities such as the United Nations and national conversations governing access to climate financing and mitigation, adaptation, and reparations. We call for solidarity across the Marianas, Micronesia, the Pacific region, and around the world. We call for global alliances that center climate justice, peace, and self-determination for marginalized Black, people of color, and Indigenous peoples everywhere. And this has been signed by the 150 people that attended this gathering. And this was our declaration that was created at the Making Wave Summit that we held just last year in October. So thank you for enduring that reading. Yeah. So if on this little poster you can sign on to that declaration. Before I pass it back to Sister Tina over here, I did want to share on this flag of Guam right here, one of the most threatened places on the island right now due to hyper-militarization that's happening. So you see our coconut tree, which is sacred. Our tree, which for most of the people in Pacific and tropics is central to life. It's also known as the tree of life. You can build houses, you could make clothes, eat, drink. It's really such a versatile plant. But in 2007, due to the importation of ornamental plants for tourism, an invasive species called the coconut rhinoceros beetle was brought in, and Home Depot, which also opened up a few years later, found a lot of these rhino beetles in the potting soil that they were selling, and it since has really devastated our coconut tree, and that's just one of the many threats that ongoing colonialism and not enough power over our trade and immigration has on our landscape. Is just imagining a paradise without coconut trees is unfathomable to me. But right behind that in our Guam flag is a stretch of land, which is the northern tip of our island, also called Retidian, and in our Chamorro language it's Latexan. And Latexan is currently a wildlife national refuge managed by the Fish and Wildlife of the United States, or the Division of Fish and Wildlife. And this place is also a homeland, and the original landowners have been fighting to get this land back for over 60 years. Our co-executive director of Micronesia Climate Change Alliance is a direct descendant of those original landowners, and this land was taken in 1990 for that refuge to protect critical species. And now, 30 years later, that land is now going to be a part of a sacrifice zone for increased militarized training. And they built 5 firing ranges that are going to be used by the U.S. Marines. And they just built the ranges over the last few years and destroyed over 900 acres or 900 football fields of pristine limestone forest. And it's right on the bluff, right overlooking the ocean. And the land below it at Retidian is the surface danger zone. They're going to be testing and training weapons such as bazookas and all types of artilleries. Weapons and guns aren't really my thing, but AR-15s and all types of military grade weapons will be practiced, and upwards of 16 million bullets will be shot in these firing ranges. And now that place that was taken to protect species is now a place to practice for war. And these families are struggling to point out the hypocrisy of the military or the federal government taking land to protect species and then destroying it for war, which is the intention of bringing death to places. And so much of our work is going to be over the next few months is to really build the resistance around stopping the firing range from being activated, which is planned for 2025. And one more thing to mention about the firing ranges is that it's built right over our sole source of drinking water that provides over 90% of water to the islands. And if you can imagine 16 million bullets, that's a lot of possibility for lead contamination. And if you follow the track record of the U.S. military, they do not have a good track record of making sure things don't get contaminated and or cleaning up after it does contaminate places. So our sole source of drinking water and all this sacred land have been destroyed for the Imperial Project. And that's just the newest among many, many years of compounding land seizures and water seizures for national security to quell any geopolitical issues that happen between this nation and other foreign entities such as China, North Korea, Russia. And our islands are situated where the westernmost quote unquote U.S. soil. And so we're the first line of defense. And today, actually, August 2nd, is the last day that the military is collecting comments on a NEPA process for a missile defense system of several nuclear-powered missile defense sites around the island that will be intercepting missiles that may or may not be aimed at us. And so they'll be testing, shooting their own ballistic missiles and then testing the efficacy of their systems by shooting them down from these missile defense systems. And it's billions and billions of dollars in contracts that go to people not from our homelands and to technology and contractors that already have a lot of lobbying power. There's so much happening to take away the IRA funding and the investments in climate in preparing this nation for climate readiness and resilience, such as the Infrastructure Reduction Act. Upwards of, I think, how much? $30 billion. But $30 billion is nothing compared to the, 50 million. Oh, 50 million is nothing compared to the U.S. military's budget of upwards of $1 trillion a year. Yeah, they spend $30 million in an hour just on our islands. And so much of what is being done that destroys our islands is directly connected to communities here, and especially every single tax-paying person in the United States really needs to be really putting pressure on divesting from funds that fund any sort of policing or military infrastructure, because it's not what the world needs right now. We really need to be investing in peace and not war. And we can't be investing in peace if we're continuously putting millions and billions of dollars into practicing for war. It seems like this country specifically has an inclination towards guns, war, violence, and it's definitely something that has also been fueling the climate crisis, because the U.S. military itself is the #1 consumer and polluter of fossil fuels on the planet. And so much of our work is to really, one, heal and ground our own people and reconciling the colonial violence that has come to our shores and within our bodies and within our spirits. And then two, really building up this resistance by connecting with people worldwide, nationwide, that feel the similar inclination to divert our energy and attention away from life-taking ways of being and more towards the indigenous ways of being, which is based around reciprocity, healing, and being in regeneration with nature. And so it's so hard to do this work sometimes, but just meeting other people who are like-minded and lighthearted and just know that a new world is possible has brought me so much hope. And gatherings like this do a lot to keep me moving forward and doing the work I can for my baby and all the babies of the future. So thank you.
I'll give you a second for questions, and I just wanted to touch on a couple of points that Moñeka made. And one of those is just being mindful also that one of the forces at play at the moment is the AUKUS arrangement, Australia, US, UK, and increasingly New Zealand and Canada, so the Kansas Alliance essentially, has a new military treaty that they are working through, which includes nuclear weapons and arsenals, which is really kind of leveraging off increasing tensions between so-called US and China as well. So the AUKUS agreement is a huge concern for us, and we've been trying to place a lot of pressure, one, on our government to not join the alliance, but it's looking like increasingly like they're going to, but also to point out that these alliances are happening without the consent of the people on the lands who are going to be most, in the territories that are going to be most affected. I had mentioned at the beginning around my favorite thing for the ocean is that it has what I consider to be two of the most sacred places on the planet, our deepest part of our planet and our highest peak on our planet. And it's that deep sacredness, again, that I referenced also in the prayer and incantation, which was you forget yourself, you forget your protocols, you forget us, and you forget the sacredness of the work in front of you. And I guess if there's one thing that, so the area I most focus on is the doctrine of discovery, its application in Aotearoa and in our Moana region. And one of the key features of that is the removal of the sacred. And the military have played such a huge role in the removal and denial of, when I say indigenous, I don't mean self-governing, I mean people who have ways of knowing, being, doing and relating that spring out of the soils that they're standing on and waters that they're surrounded by. So they are a continuity of those waters and those soils, and that makes them indigenous in the same way that a plant is indigenous. So the removal of the Indigenous sacred across Te Whananui a Kiwa, if I go back to the early, well, there's Magellan, but then also some of the earliest things that those conquistadors and so-called explorers did was to infect our people. And they did that largely infect sexually transmitted diseases. The other thing particularly that Cook did was that he would abduct our ariki, some of our, our sacred leaders. One of the first people that he abducted in Ma'ohinui, or Tahiti, was Poirua, their ariki, who is a wahine, and she was hapu when he abducted her. He abducted her because some of his own crew had decided to abscond, so he abducted her to get them to bring his own crew back. The next thing that happened was that they wrote about our women and our children, our young child women, in pornographic ways in their letters that they sent back to England. And the first thing that England did was to use those stories as the basis of orgy nights in brothels in London, and then create pornographic periodicals that luminaries such as Voltaire subscribed to. So our first experience of cultural appropriation was at the hands of, because Cook was a military, he was a naval officer. They call him an explorer, they call him a scientist. He was a naval man. These were all naval endeavors. It was all military going out and doing that. That continued through into the practice of R&R and sexual violence, the sexual violence that surrounded these military establishments. So human trafficking, sexual assaults and rape, abduction of women and children and sexual violation of women and children featured in World War I and World War II through their R&R culture, resulting also in tiki culture, tiki club culture, where they desanctified and desecrated our very sacred features. I don't like the word gods, but our ancestors, our representations of our ancestors, and put them in bars, put their heads into cups that you would pour alcohol into and get drunk out of. You can do that today, right, at a tiki bar here. Tiki bars are rooted in cultural appropriation of the Pacific and our sacredness. And so there's a long history to this practice. Now, the destruction of our sacredness includes the plundering of these areas, the attacks upon our ancestors, our plant ancestors, the attacks upon our sacred spaces. If we look at this through the lens of Kanaki, you can see just in this last week, so in the 1800s, the uprising of the Kanak people was led by Chief Atai. It was the first uprising, major uprising. There were multiple uprisings, but he led one of the most major uprisings against French colonialism in Kanaki. The French forces beheaded him, took his head to Paris. It was only returned in 2004. They held this rangatira, this leader's head, as a reminder to the people of the power that they have, and only returned it in 2004 and put him, his people created a tomb for him. This last week, French militia desecrated that tomb, smashed it up, and desecrated one of their most sacred spaces. And they do that because now the descendants of the Kanak descendants are again rising up against French colonialism. This is in spite of the fact that France themselves signed in 1960 the Declaration for Decolonization, within which they made clear commitments to decolonize, followed by the Noumea Accords and the Matignon Accords, where they made clear commitments and promises to decolonize. And all our Kanak relations have been doing is trying to get them to keep to their own promises and commitments that they've made through the UN and through the Noumea Accords. And then in the face of saying, yeah, we're going to decolonize, we're getting out of here, then in 2021, Macron releases the Indo-Pacific strategy. The Indo-Pacific strategy is full of military ambitions, which is kind of kicked off again by AUKUS. Seeing these military arrangements that they're making, France is like, okay, well, wait, we're still going to have our military bases there. We're still going to carry out our military activities. And there are four main aspects to it. One is the military strategy. And as soon as the Kanak people saw this, they're like, again, they don't mean anything that they say. They clearly are not going to decolonize. They've just put out an international strategy to declare that they still have military ambitions for the Pacific. Also, the shipping lanes, and I can't overstate the importance of shipping lanes to the global military complex and the global colonial project, that the control of these shipping lanes, this is including shipping lanes that ship weapons to Palestine, to other places in the world, must move through these areas. Tourism, which continues to be a driver of the removal of Indigenous sacredness across the Pacific, because people are caught up in this idea that our region is somewhere where you go to escape stress. It's somewhere you go to escape hardship. So that fantasy rests upon denying the realities of the oppression that we experience there. So people are inclined to turn a blind eye to it because that conflicts with their idea of paradise. I can't have a nice happy paradise holiday if someone's oppressed behind me. So I just turn my back on it. So tourism, which continues to drive a lot of that blind spots to what's happening. And seabed drilling and the nickel. Sorry, I should commit. I almost forgot that they're the second largest nickel producer in the world. Again, a major precious metal for e-batteries and for cell phones, increasing value as well. And all of that money that they've been getting out of that goes to France. Doesn't go to Kanak people or Kanak communities, bypasses that place and goes back to France. So that's one of the reasons why we are very much holding them in the forefront of our minds and hearts and standing in solidarity with them. They don't have the social media forces that are at play. They have made very clear indications that the markers of genocide are being met. There's only 100,000 people. Their population is only 100,000 people. And when they've gone to stand up checkpoints, their youth have been shot in the back of the head and in the back for standing up checkpoints to stop the French military mobilization across their islands. They are carrying out collective punishment. So whole communities and in fact whole provinces have been denied medical care and emergency food supplies by the French government. So very concerned about what's happening there. And very keen to express. And we've also put together a solidarity statement, which we will hope that whoever it is that's taking notes out of this machine that's recording us, that they will absolutely support our statement that's been offered by our sister Moñeka here. They'll also support the points that we raise in our position statement that decries French activities in Kanaki, decries the US government and its continued militarization in Guahan, in Okinawa, in Hawaii as well. I know the military leases are coming up, 99-year leases are coming up in Hawaii. And if you go on Facebook and you do a search under military leases hearings in Hawaii, incredible testimonies being offered by our Kanaka Māori relations over there, and they can end those leases within the next year and actually call for that land back, and that's the stand that they're making, and we're in solidarity with them around that as well. So thank you. It was just to talk to those few things. You had a question?
Yeah, so you said Canucks are from Guam?
New Caledonia.
And then you mentioned 100,000 people. You're talking about a group of islands?
No, so New Caledonia, Kanaki. Kanaki is the contemporary term that has been taken and claimed by the Kanak peoples. So when we say peoples, Kanak, the the communities that live in the islands that are today termed as New Caledonia are actually quite diverse. They have different languages, they have different protocols, so they're not considered one people, they're considered multiple peoples. But for the purposes of their anti-colonial movement against France, they claimed the name, which had actually been turned into a pejorative, Kanak, which is, it relates to the word Kanak, Kanaka Maoli in Hawaii, had been turned into a pejorative term in the 60s and 70s, and then the Kanak peoples reclaimed that term and used it to describe their collective identity across those islands. So yeah, there's about 100,000 of them. Altogether, that was a bit long, but it's just not as simple as saying, yeah, they're one peoples, they're not. So, and to acknowledge how they have come to define themselves.
How many major islands? I mean, not the small ones, but how many major populated islands are we talking about? Maybe approximately. Does that include New Zealand?
No. New Caledonia is, and yeah, where it's like
No.
Vanuatu, yeah. Yeah.
So how many major populated islands are we talking about with those 20
Well, there's one major island, and then there's like smaller islands that are around the outside of it. But the major there's one majorly. No, that's called New Caledonia.
So the Pacific is made up of 3 colonial areas: Micronesia, where Guam is, which is mostly the North Pacific; Melanesia, which is southwestern; and then Polynesia, which is a vast expanse all the way from Hawaii down to Easter Island,
And
all
across
the way across
to Aotearoa.
Aotearoa.
I think it's like, if you go from the tip of the North Island of New Zealand, New Caledonia is actually closer to us than the bottom of the South Island. So it's very close to New Zealand.
That's why I was, yeah, but so you're
And that's one of the reasons why because we are its closest neighbor. So we have been calling upon our government to say, look, this is our closest neighbor. We should be standing in solidarity with them.
Morai, sorry if I'm mispronouncing, Morai people related to your
Maori,
the Maori?
we're all related. We're all related.
Yeah, that's considered South Pacific culture, or South Pacific.
I wouldn't want to. Where they're very. The Pacific is so diverse. It's again like 60% of the world's ocean and 28 independent island nations with many still colonized nations. And there's like over 1,000 languages
Yeah.
in the Pacific. We just had the Festival of Pacific Arts in Hawaii, which is every 4 years we meet as Pacific people, and just the richness and the diversity of our peoples was on full display through our arts, culture, food. And all our struggles are very much connected, especially because of climate change, and especially because the way our region is being played as pawns between
Yeah.
China on one side of our ocean
Yeah.
and the Americas on the other side of our ocean. And so there needs to be a lot more work in our region to build up our own sovereignty, to also, the Pacific means peace,
Yeah.
to be the peace bringers into the world, and especially for the future. Before we do close, if there is any other questions, I was hoping to get a photo of us holding the Kanaki flag.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
The Kanaki, as she was explaining, are dealing with a lot of violence right now. They've cut off all social media and all communications to the island. So what we're hearing is very low numbers
Yeah.
of what's actually probably going on.
Yeah.
They've shut down the airport since April, and so there's very little knowledge as to the level of violence that's happening in New Caledonia right now.
Yeah.
Media is not allowed in, and then we have West Papua, which is a whole other story
Yeah.
of real oppression and genocide happening in West Papua, which is the west side of Papua New Guinea, and it's colonized by the government of Indonesia right now.
I think one of the things that when we discuss West Papua and Aotearoa, so New Zealand has the highest population of broad Pacific nations of anywhere in the world, and a part of that is our story of colonizing the Pacific. So New Zealand and Australia Crown governments have together colluded with the US government and other governments to continue to oppress Pacific nations and island states in that space as well. And one of the, it would be easy to say, well, West Papua is different because it's colonized by Indonesia as opposed to a Western European state like many of these other Pacific nations. But the driver for the bulk of their oppression is US mining industries extracting precious metals in West Papua. Indonesia is not going to colonize just for the hell of it. They colonized it because they wanted the money that's being generated through the mineral extraction of largely US and Canadian companies over there as well. Yeah, to a much lesser degree. I mean, I don't want to downplay the role of economic imperialism, and I would say China has been prolific in its economic imperialism across the Pacific through a lot of infrastructural investment. And that's kind of a part of the tension, is that you have this overt military colonial oppression at the hands of US. You have political oppression in transnational areas like, which is what New Zealand, Australia, US, Canada, NGO oppression is happening in that space as well. And then you have the economic oppression of China. So a lot of what's happening in issues in Kanaki was, as they started to move more towards decolonizing, some of the Kanak leaders were striking up discussions with China as a potential source or export site for their nickel, and starting to have discussions around how they might economically liberate themselves from the dependency upon US and other NGOs and other places like that. So that made France very nervous, and on the back of some of those discussions, they have just basically put everything in reverse. I don't want to make it sound like they were ever really that committed to decolonizing. They probably weren't, but it's gone 100 k's an hour in the opposite direction now, exacerbated by AUKUS, exacerbated by the tensions between China and the US. And we're just kind of in the middle of this oppressor's playground. And it's, places like Aotearoa, they're establishing rocket launching sites on our lands, on Maori land, which makes us strategic targets as well. Maori land or Maori land. Maori land, as well, which makes us, again, strategic targets, in the case of a tension. Did you have a question?
I do. I apologize for coming late. Thank you. And I know we're out of time. My name is Dana, and I live on the Pacific coast of Taiwan. And I in Hualien County, which is a predominantly indigenous county in Taiwan. Yes, that's right. I know the canoe stories. And so I wanted to bring Taiwan and indigeneity and indigenous, 42 different languages, 16 recognized nations, and many other Pingpu or Plains peoples in the western part of Taiwan that are not at this time recognized by Taiwan's government. And I think the role of Taiwan in this is really critical. And I've been listening to the stories of militarism, across the Pacific, and of course what we see now with the ramping up of U.S. militarism in Taiwan in strategic defense against China, and the impacts that surely will have on indigenous nations in Taiwan is something I think we all want to really pay careful attention to. And it's exactly. So I guess the question, to turn it into a question, and I'm a professor and teacher there, and but originally from North Carolina, and have been active with IEN for almost 20 years. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is sort of build conversations and ways of just connectivity, right, across these different sites of conversation. Of course, in Taiwan, we have a lot of interaction with Māori colleagues and iwi through the National Donghua University, which is where I've been based for a while. But how to elevate this discussion about militarism on the ground, in Taiwan? Of course, there's a real pressure, right? There's a real pressure, and I think this is felt by many indigenous peoples and nations that I talk to be very much pro-Taiwanese sovereignty in this kind of de-Sinification and this shoring up against Chinese imperialism. but that also opens the door to new forms of U.S. militarism, which in a very small island will impact indigenous territories. I guess as I go back to teach this fall, I teach at Taipei Medical University in Taipei and at National Donghua in Hualien. What are some of the things, I wonder if there's an opportunity there for indigenous students in Taiwan to be thinking carefully about militarism specifically, given the Ganaki example you've shared, given the sort of Chamorro and Guam. So it's just an open question.
I'm going to pass this across to you, Moñeka, but I did want to say that one of the dominant responses to talking about the doctrine of discovery, particularly in relation to the Pacific, but nearly everywhere, is that people say, yeah, but if it wasn't for the UK colonizing you, you'd be speaking Japanese by now. Or if it wasn't for this nation, then it would be another nation. And it's what we call the pick your poison kind of narrative. And which is why gatherings like this that are centered on indigeneity is the most powerful standing upon which to make, because I'm not going to pick my colonizer. And neither of them have legitimacy in our space as well. So I completely, one thing I would say is that I think, nations like mega colonizers like the US and the UK do a very good job of minimizing their colonialism and amplifying the colonialism of states that they are in conflict with. And so they've amplified Chinese colonialism and Chinese imperialism, which is, and not to excuse it, but that is nothing in the face of the military colonialism of the US and what that does and what has already done, and the stripping of Banabas as well. The absolute stripping of Banabas to make it inhabitable, the absolute devastation of Kaho'olawe, the Marshall Islands, the nuclear dumping, the jelly bait. You cannot compare what Chinese economic imperialism has done to what US imperialism and militarism has done. So when people bring that to me as a narrative discourse, I completely reject it, because it's a pick your colonizer discourse, when we should be standing on the space of indigenous rights are inherent and inalienable. They're literally described, even if UN doctrine's your thing, described in UN doctrine as inalienable and inherent rights for self-determination. And it's upon that I begin the conversation and won't be shifted from when that point is raised.
Thank you for that question, and I look forward to continuing to connect, because I think that there's a lot more that needs to happen. And we do a lot of exchanges in Guahan with different communities, mostly college students across Taiwan, and definitely echoing the sentiments of the hypocrisy of how the U.S. is going into Taiwan saying we're here to support your sovereignty, while at the same time they're colonizing and without free, prior, informed consent, desecrating and destroying our lands for their imperial military projects in Guahan, in Hawaii, and have stolen our lands for centuries now. And so, and totally disregarding indigenous rights. And for them to go to Taiwan and to indigenous communities and say, we support you in your quest for sovereignty, but never mind the people that we're doing the exploitation to, and silencing us and invisibilizing our struggles, needs to be called out and needs to be completely exposed, especially given the historical, undeniable harms created across the Pacific for the project. Definitely think that there's so much rich discussion and lots of cultural sharing too, and beauty to share with our indigenous Taiwanese relatives. Not just the pains and the harms, but definitely the beautiful ancestral connections of resilience and of regeneration. I wanted to just point out, everybody, this is Anna, and she is another Chamorro woman from the island of Saipan, and with her she brought some piece of our land, one of the newest islands in our archipelago, Agrigan. And Agrigan is an active volcano. We have many active volcanoes, and she actually lived there for 9 months, was the only woman on the island, with a few other men. And this beautiful, pristine islands have been eyed by the U.S. military for more training, and we have resisted the use of the island of Pagan, and we've said no, and so those have been taken off the table, thankfully, but for now. And this sand is volcanic. It's also magnetic, and so when you interact with it, just make sure that you are wanting to magnetize good things in your life. Don't interact with it while you're angry or why you have any ill will, because that will be what you attract to yourself, because it is magnetic. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We do want to take a photo, and before we do that, just to get back into our bodies, I wanted to share, I'll probably not do this on the mic, just a little bit of movement to connect our struggles from the ocean to here in this beautiful Cherokee homeland.
And if we can stay afterwards to get a
Soto,
with the
yeah.
Canuck, flag as well, because they do love it. They are loving seeing photos from around the world of people because they feel heard. So the few messages that we have gotten back when we've arranged to do actions or show them our solidarity is that it means so much to them. So if it's okay, if people can stick around after we do this and get a photo together to send across to them as well. Kia ora.
You've been listening to the Indigenous Environmental Network. For more information, go to ienearth.org.